Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on traditional lands of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, as well as to the elders of any other communities who might be with us today. I also want to acknowledge the fact that the way many of us relate to gender is based on an Anglo framework, and how we're talking tonight is specifically relating to an Anglo framework. So when I say something like, sovereignty was never ceded of this land, I'm also acknowledging the fact that the way that we engage with gender can be perceived and can be felt as violent because it has been used to dispossess the First Nations. So I acknowledge that, and I recognise the impact of that. I'd also like to acknowledge the queers on Manus who can't be with us today, and our ongoing oppression of them. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Nevo Zisin. Nevo is a writer, an activist, a massive cutie, a public speaker, a very well-dressed person.
Thank you, you too.
And coincidentally, a very good friend of mine. I don't know if you picked that up.
We coordinated these outfits, by the way.
We did. I'm reading my notes. You may have noticed that we are dressed to match. So Nev, I think both of us can agree that clothing is a crucial part of the queer experience. Mm-hmm. As it's as much about expression as it is flagging who you are to other queers. In your book, clothing marks really important milestones, such as where you can wear trousers under your skirt at school, or the fact that you literally cut up your uniform at the end of your time, or in the afterword where you talk about all of the different versions of yourself. Tell me, what does clothing mean to you, and why is it important?
Well, firstly, it was very important that we wore matching outfits because I thought it would be really cute.
Tick.
I feel like I've had such a tumultuous relationship with clothing throughout my life. Or maybe less clothing and more the reactions that people have had as a result of my clothing. Yeah, there's this really weird thing, I don't know if you guys have heard about it, but when babies are born, people categorize them based on their genitals and put them in different coloured fabrics depending on that, which is bizarre. And then you're expected to maintain that throughout your life. And if you have a certain set of genitals and you put light blue clothing on that baby, everyone will assume it's a boy and will freak out if it's not and not understand why you've put it in blue. So that was my experience growing up with colours and fabrics and, genitals. And I guess, I don't know, I just wanted to wear things I wanted to wear. It sounds so radical, but I just wanted to be able to dress however I wanted. And they weren't even such bizarre outfits. They were great. They just weren't the ones I was allowed to wear because of my colour coding. So yeah, it's been a really interesting path of navigating what I feel comfortable in, what I feel safe in. It's been really interesting watching that shift across my life as well. When I was in a stage of really repressing my masculinity, the kind of outfits that I would put together that I really felt uncomfortable with, and nowadays sort of feeling so affirmed in my gender and the way that I'm being perceived and seen by people, and now being able to kind of experiment with femininity and wear more feminine clothes and wear earrings and nail polish and things that I never would have worn when I was younger. So that's been really interesting to watch that fluidity throughout my life. But yeah, for me, clothing is a marker of my activism. It's a marker of my identity. It's a way I set myself aside from others. I mean, you get on the train in the morning and you can very much see the uniforms that are pre-prescribed for men and for women. And
I always feel like when I go on the train, everyone's wearing black and I'm wearing this. And it's I'm not from Melbourne.
I feel like they know we're not from Earth. They look at us like we're some sort of aliens. The space around me expands on public transport when I look visibly queer. Suddenly in a very crowded tram. There are so many seats next to me, which is actually great, and I'm fine with that. But I think it's really interesting that as soon as you kind of jump out of those categories and those costumes and those pre-prepared kind of corporate ideas of what gender looks like, you become this anomaly.
Well, what I thought was really interesting is that when you came out as like a man and you got rid of a lot of your clothing and then you like mourned that, it was a part of your mourning. It was almost
It's
like
still one of my
shedding
biggest
skin.
regrets. I had
Yeah.
such good outfits in those bags. I don't know what I was thinking. I was like, I'm a man now, I can't wear any of these. And then I threw them out, and then like a while later I was like, oh, I had this one like pink tartan shirt that had like a hole in the back, and it was so cute, and I think about it all the time.
I'll
But
make
it's
you a
fine.
new one,
It was
babe.
necessary.
I'll make you a new one.
Thank
I'll
you.
make
It was
new
a
one.
necessary part of my process, and I acknowledge it. But I think I did that not because I necessarily really wanted to, but because that's what was explained to me I had to do in order to be a man. I had to shed parts of myself. I had to get rid of that skin and grow into a new one. And it turns out I've just always been in my skin. And I don't have to go anywhere.
This kind of leads into my next question, because I'm really aware that this notion of authenticity has been really weaponized against trans people. For instance, in order to access treatment, we have to convince family and doctors that what we experience is not necessarily real but static, that this isn't just a phase, that we won't regret it or sort of grow out of it. So I'm interested in this mimicry of the term authentic, when in the book you talk about being your authentic self. Especially because you shift and change over the duration of the book from, identifying lesbian to man to non-binary. My question is, do you think anyone can ever really be authentic? Anyone, not necessarily trans people.
I think when you acknowledge that authenticity is fluid, then yes, you can be authentic. I do think that people can be their authentic selves, but I think what it means to be your authentic self is going to change through time. And yeah, I mean, I struggle with this idea of being static so much, because it's almost like it's a standard that you're held to that is put on a pedestal. Like, I don't know about you, but I really want to change and evolve and grow. Like, I don't want to be the same person my entire life, and it's so weaponized, particularly for queer people, of like, it's just a phase, your sexuality will change. And I've always sort of said, well, what isn't a phase? I don't know what isn't a phase. Like the anecdote I always talk about is that when I was a toddler, I was really into canned mushrooms. That was like my jam. And you could set me up on a rug with a bunch of canned mushrooms. I was good to go. I'm not that into them anymore. My palate's changed. But that doesn't mean I wasn't really into them then. I was, and it doesn't, so it means that even if something is changing and growing, it doesn't mean that it wasn't real for a while. That boyfriend that you had in high school that you don't want to talk about? Like, you dated him and you can't avoid that. That was real, even if it was just a phase. So this idea that because things are shifting and changing, they're not real, is really problematic. So I think in writing the book, I had to acknowledge that some truths that I said at certain points that were true at the time were no longer true for me. And that didn't have to discredit me or invalidate me. And I mean, God, like, trans people are allowed to make mistakes, and we're allowed to change our minds about things, and it's not apocalyptic or the end of the world. Like, when people are like, well, what if you change your mind? Well, I'll change my mind, and I'll grow, and I'll make different decisions, just like you do.
I think this is interesting because for me, like, changing your body, especially like getting chest surgery, and I know we've talked about this, it's a big step. Certain things are big steps. Like hormones I didn't see as a big step because I could stop them. But when you invest something, it's almost like there's this expectation to know from everyone. And what I find really difficult is like, I don't know. I don't know if I want this, but like other people's input just like blows that doubt up, and then some, and then some, and then some. So it's like authenticity isn't something we're allowed because we're not allowed the space to be wrong.
And also, I just think like we have no idea how big some of the decisions we've made in our life have ended up being in the long term. Like, choosing that soup over that salad may have been the difference of your entire life, and you don't know that. But these kind of decisions, people think this is like, because you can actually see it, that it feels like something so huge. And I remember my surgeon saying to me, you know, once you do this, you cannot go back. This is it. You cannot have your breasts again. You can't, you know, and I was like, that's a lie. Like, that's not true. Like, yeah, okay, so I won't have my breasts, but if I really turned around one day and thought, oh, you know, I actually want breasts again, I could get them. It's not that hard. Like, yeah, I'd need some money and I'd need to do things, but, you know, this idea that, like, all these things are irreversible or you'll never escape them. You know, like, there are so many minor decisions we make in our life that set out a course for the rest of our life that we're not aware of, and the fact that so many others have to be a part of your decision-making when it's about you and your life is just, it's a very unique situation, I think, to trans people.
So on this notion of authenticity, we were both at National Young Writers Festival. I don't know if we were on the same panel. Sorry, if we were...
I was like, we were definitely on the same panel.
Same panel. But so I remember seeing Khalid speak. Khalid is a friend of mine, speak about Memoir. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but what lives at the core, at the heart of Memoir is this lie that we remember how it actually was. So I'm interested to hear about your experience of writing memoir and your engagement with the genre.
It was almost impossible. It was like the best and worst thing I've ever done. Memory is terrifying. It is just absolutely terrifying because it is completely subjective. There is no such thing as objective memory. That's why, like, there's no such thing as objective history, really. You know, our memory is subjective and we remember things differently and we're forced to remember things differently, and trauma shapes our brains and neuroplasticity shapes our brains, and everyone has a different account of things. And I was so afraid not just of not telling the truth, but of saying something and then someone saying, no, that's not what happened. And you know what, at the end of the day, I thought, you know what, I understand that this is a non-fiction book and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that I'm not fabricating anything. And I tried my best. And luckily, I was a generation where I grew up on Facebook, so I was able to just go back and read my statuses from when I was 15 and really get into the mind frame. But I was really committed to that. But I also just thought, you know what, I'm just representing my truth. That is all I can represent. That is all I can do. That's the only thing I can truly be an expert in, is myself and my story. And if someone turns around and says, that's not how it happened, I'll explain to them, that's how it happened for me. That might not be how you remember it, but your memory is just as valid as my memory is. And I've remembered it this way for a reason. It's hurt me this way for a reason. And that's what is real and what is true is not really the point. The point is how I feel, how I feel, and that, like, I feel really hurt by some of the things that people did that they claim they didn't do. And that was my big thing as well, is like, you want to be transphobic, that's one thing, but then don't tell me that you weren't. Because, like, you can apologize for being crappy, but you can't tell someone you were crappy to that you were never crappy. Like, that is my strong line.
Yeah, it's like, so this is a conversation that I had with my mother. I came out to her by accident the first time. She
Me
guessed.
Me too.
And then the second time, she found a log that I was talking about fancying women, and she sat me down and she started having the same conversation that we had after the first time, and I started laughing. And she couldn't understand why I was laughing. I'm like, because we've had this conversation before. Like, you know I'm gay. Like, you know I like women. She's like, her response to this was, I think I'd remember if we'd had this conversation before. To which, of course, I did exactly that and started laughing harder, which irritated her. And then she said, well, if we've had this conversation before, then what am I going to say next? And I said, you're going to say something like, don't give up on men just because you've had a few bad experiences? And she said, well, don't. If she hears this, she will swear black and blue that none of that happened.
Wait,
And
both
it's
the
like,
conversations?
or like all of it. I guarantee you. And I'm like, this is the thing with memory. It's like, I have very specific reasons for remembering it this way because I found it hilarious and baffling. And she was just another conversation for her. And so I think this idea of memory is really interesting because it is so elusive and it is so subjective. Yes.
Yeah, I definitely shifted from trying, I guess my focus shifted from trying to get truth and like objective truth and holistic truth and universal truth. I think that's what I was first getting at. Like, I want to write a story that everyone will agree with. Everyone will agree happened. And then I was like, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. I don't care. This is my story. I don't need anyone. No one is an authority to come to me and be like, you're right, that did happen. Like, I know what happened. And so my focus, it shifted from universal truth to holistically me truth. And that, I would write about myself as 14 and then I could hear my 14-year-old self in the back of my head be like, that's not what happened. That's not the way that I would have written it, or because I was writing as a 20-year-old my perspective on those things, and then I was being very critical sometimes, like I was being quite apologetic for some of those things, or I was, explaining something problematic I'd done and then being like, oh, but I'd never do that now, or whatever, and then my younger self was like, stop that. You can't do that. I'm talking right now. This is my turn. So it was about
You can't rewrite this.
Yeah, you can't rewrite your own history like that because that's not authentic and that's not nonfiction. So I think it was like kind of staring into some of my weaknesses and some of the things I didn't do very well and some of the parts of myself I don't like, and putting that on the page. And that was me trying to be as like honest about memory and authenticity as I could be.
So we spoke about this earlier. In particular, I'm interested in this idea of previously being problematic and engaging with your old foibles, I guess, even though you've moved past them. And I know that we both sort of agree that, so when you're brought up as a girl, greater mainstream society expects you to be small, expects you to be quiet, expects you to be humble, and then you move into
How did
what
you
we
go
are.
at that? Because I wasn't very good at that.
I was so shit at that.
Yeah.
Pardon my French. But then you move, obviously we are both non-binary trans people, and we move into feminist spaces and trans spaces. And because we embody certain masculinities, we're expected to be small, or at least be very aware of the space that we take up.
And very apologetic.
And even though the contexts of those two are logically very different, the experience of them is very similar. So I'm interested to hear if you had any reservations about releasing this book into the world, because it is, it's you, it's these aspects of you, and for many people it will be the only or first engagement that anyone has had with trans narratives. So in a way, you become representative of all trans people in that moment. So what anxieties did you have? What reservations
I'm having
did you
anxieties just with you saying all
Sorry.
well, thanks for the reminder, Fury. Oh God, I could talk about my reservations about the book for years. I will. That's why I see a psych. No, I didn't write for 4 months. I was completely incapable of writing my book. I stopped and just panicked and was like, what have I done? Is it too late to unsign a contract? This is the worst thing I've ever decided to do. And it was for so many reasons. It was, it was publicly outing myself and not having the ability to go back into the closet if I so choose at an older age. That's a great decision for 20-year-old Nev to make, but maybe 40-year-old Nev won't feel so good about that. There was, the fear of online hatred. And I mean, you could go online and say that soda water is better than still and people would tell you to kill yourself. But I was still, I've been receiving death threats since I was 17 or 16. So just more of that is always, a lot. But I think what I was most afraid of was, being this trans representative and spokesperson is so not what I want to do or be. I just want to represent me and nuance. I feel like there's no space for nuance when you're a spokesperson of something, and I'm all about nuance. I mean, I'm non-binary for goodness sake. Like, I don't believe in binaries. I'm not going to be one or the other. Like, I want to talk about the grey areas. So yeah, I was concerned about that. I was really concerned about the fact that I was white, that I was masculine, that I was a trans man, that I came from a pretty privileged background. Like, who wants to hear my story? Like, why am I writing when it should be like an Indigenous brother boy writing about their story? And, you know, that's really how I felt. And then it was actually Fury who said to me, do you know how many mediocre white men have written terrible books and made a living on them? And I was like, oh yeah. Yeah, maybe I can just write my book. And they've never asked themselves those questions. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm not taking space away from other people in my community, but I'm taking some space away from all of the very loud white men that have been taking space from everyone for almost all of history. So yeah, that really helped me, so thank you. But yeah, reservations around that, definitely around family stuff and kind of, you know, outing some very deep and personal family dynamics. I mean, I was consenting to that, but family members weren't necessarily. There's a lot of memoirists who have nothing to do with their family anymore. That's kind of just a part of the art form in a way. I lost a family member to this process. You know, you win some, you lose some. But it's just the risks that we take. And this was always about more than me. I just did not do this for me. If I did, I just would have done it very differently. You know, this was because I just didn't have anyone to look to when I was a kid. And it wasn't even that long ago. Like, it wasn't that long ago that I came out as trans. I say this to people all the time. I came out in 2013. Like, it's 2017 now. It's not that long, but it was so radically different. I had no trans representation. So I needed to do it because I needed to be the person that I never had growing up.
So a big feeling that I got from the book was difficulty around emotion, the emotion of grief. So your mum, I feel, grieved her daughter. I know that my mum grieved her daughter in a similar way. And I feel she also sort of grieved the hopes that she had for you and the life that she saw you as having. How did you manage her grief?
I mean, I hate that I had to manage it. It was really unfair. It was really unfair to have to manage everyone's grief and my own at the same time, because no one was managing their own, and I was managing everyone's. Yeah. It was really hard. It was just really hard. I mean, I speak about parents as like GPSs. I think that they, you know, like make set destinations for their kids, and then when their kids go off track, they have to reroute, and it takes them a little while. And, you know, as long as they can still get married and have kids, it like makes sense. But when I came out as trans, I think my mum's GPS exploded, which is something I advocate for now. I kind of just think you should just have kids and maybe not project all your expectations onto them. Really radical, I know. Yeah, it was really hard. It's interesting now, again, because this book was not so long ago, but because, you know, that was like a pretty long time ago in the scheme of my life. I'm only 21, so like 4 years is a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, I've had conversations with parents now where I sit with them and they tell me about their grief and losing their child, and it brings me back to things that my mum said to me. And I remember sitting with a mother of a trans boy, and she was talking about this and saying, you know, I feel like I've lost my daughter and I feel so guilty for that. And I looked at her and I said, you know, your feelings are so valid. That must be really hard. I'm sorry you're going through this. And those were things I was never able to say to my own mum because it was about me. And I said that to her. I was like, you know, this is really cathartic for me that I'm able to say this to you because I was never able to say that to my mum. And she was like, oh my God, I would never say this to my son. Did your mum say that to you? And I was like, yeah, you know, it was part of her processing. And she was like, no, I would never. And I thought, okay, so maybe that wasn't okay. Maybe that was emotional labor that I should not have been taking on. But it has been very cathartic to be able to talk to parents that are experiencing transphobia and kind of say to them, I get it, and it's really tough, and these are the steps that you need to go through. I wish my mum would have had that person when I came out to do that for her that wasn't me. But I'm happy to be that person now for other parents, so it means that their kids don't have to be.
Yeah, I found it really confronting. Like, I was talking to my cousin about it and sort of like having a vent about how mum didn't get it. And she sort of paused and she said, well, you know, it must be really hard for her. And at that moment I was just like that hasn't occurred to me. Like that everybody hasn't said that to me. Like I don't have empathy for her.
As if it's this revolutionary concept that like your family might be struggling. You know, like no one says like, how do you feel?
That's it. Like only other trans people can empathize with that particular plight. Everyone else they go to is, I'm going to empathize with this cis person because that must be really hard for them.
Or they tell you should be really grateful because your parents didn't kick you out.
Yep.
And it's like, wow, that's a low bar. Like,
you do not expect much.
I have had people, and when I even saying this in public freaks me out because I feel like I'm just going to sound so ungrateful. My mum is amazing. Amazing. I have amazing family members. They're not amazing because they accepted me. Those are not the reasons why they're amazing. They have lots of other reasons. It would actually be insulting to them to say that that's the reason why they're amazing. I have been at events where my mum and I have spoken at, where people have come up to her afterwards, right next to me, and say, you are so amazing for supporting your child. What an awful thing to say. And I'm standing there like, I'm sorry. Hi, I'm Nevo. Nice to meet you. Like, yeah, I understand that I'm trans and that's really complicated for a child to be trans, but like, I'm so kind and I'm such a good person and I work so hard. I don't lie to my mum. I didn't stay out past curfew. I was really responsible. She could trust me. I was a good kid. I gave her a run for her money, but like, that's what kids do, you know? And so to say that to my face was like, well,
it implies you're a burden.
Yeah. And God, I've already felt like that long enough. I don't need anyone to say that.
You mentioned before about how you lost a family member in the process. I'm really interested about that process of considering others and how you represent them and how you choose what to put in. Do you want to talk a little bit about, I guess, burning bridges or maintaining bridges in terms of memoir?
Yeah. There's a lot more content I could have put in that book that would have burnt bridges faster. But that wasn't my intention with the book, you know? And I was always thinking about, why are you doing this? What's the point? The point was not to like out my family history or our experiences. The point was not to slander them. I remember I was dreading my siblings reading the manuscript and I sent it to them beforehand because I wanted to say to them, look, you read this, if there's anything you feel really uncomfortable with, I'll edit it and I'll change it. Like I really felt strongly about ethical writing. I wanted them to consent to what I was writing of them. But I did warn them that you need to remember this is my story, not yours, and some of the not so nice things I have to leave in there because it's part of the journey. And I remember my brothers coming back to me and I was terrified. And one of them was like, I thought I came off pretty well actually, considering. And I was like, well, I mean, yeah, I wasn't trying to make you out to be a monster, you know? Like, if I wanted that, I wouldn't be connected to you anymore. Like, we're still family and I love you and like, that's not what this book is about. And I think people were surprised. And so that was important. There was definitely things that I included that I was then like, this isn't relevant to my transition story. This is relevant to a different trajectory and a different story. Yeah, my dad was really bothered that I didn't write about him more. And I explained to him that if I had written about him more, he wouldn't like what I had written. So I left in as much as was necessary. But yeah, it's a really difficult process. And I was scared I was going to lose people I didn't want to lose. I didn't lose anyone I didn't want to lose. And my siblings came to me and were like, thank you so much for writing that. I feel like I finally get it. Which was really meaningful for me, very emotional. Also kind of like, I was saying all of that stuff for years if you would have just listened to me.
We just need a
But now
publisher
that it's
to
a
approve
published
it.
book, yeah, you'll listen. But in saying that, you know, it actually was a huge turning point for my relationship with my siblings. Yeah.
How did you choose? Because I mean, I'm assuming when you sit down to write a memoir, you get flooded with all of the thoughts and feelings. How did you choose and cultivate or sculpt the narrative that the book came in?
My editor. No. Yes, but also I started off by writing kind of a chronology and like the big bits. I actually started off by doing a transcript of an interview that I had, or not an interview, but a speech I'd given. So I kind of shaped the book around that. I wanted it to be chronological rather than thematic. It made more sense to me that way. I just started like putting a lot of subcategories and subheadings and then filling them with lots of little ones and lots of dot points and then filling it with research and going back to that time in Facebook and looking at the things that I uploaded and where I was at and what I was doing and really getting into that frame of mind. And then I kind of just wrote little chunks on each of those and then went back to my editor and was like, which of this do you want to hear and which of this do you not? Big feedback that I got quite across the board was that I was being too like academic about some of the things I was writing, which I think got to the more emotional sides, me coming out, battling depression, feeling suicidal, that kind of stuff I was very academic about. I was like, this is what happened, and then this is how I felt, but this is, you know, and she was like, I get it, but you need to actually dig deep and show us how you feel. And in doing that, I had to feel all those things again. And I don't think people understand that writing memoir means reliving every single trauma that you've ever experienced and remembering things that you'd rather forget and then putting that on a page. And that was really, I was traumatized. Like, I struggled so much writing that book, and I'm not sure I've recovered from that. Like, it's a lot. It's a lot, and then everyone wants to talk about it, which I totally get, but it's like, it's painful. It's really painful. I just want to move on, you know? And I needed to get it on the page in order to move on. But yeah, I mean, there was definitely a lot of red wine involved in writing that. I remember saying that to my editor, and she was like, yep, that's how we do it. That's how to write. Yeah. You can edit sober. That's fine. Red wine really helped. And just getting it out, dealing with it, dealing with all the crap. And then it meant that when the book was actually done, I was able to have this really amazing moment where I very literally closed the book on that and just moved on. And that's why I kind of feel quite detached from the book now. Like, people talk to me about it and I'm like, oh yeah, that thing. But it's not my story anymore. Like, I got my healing out of it. I got what I needed from it. It's everyone else's story now. And it's about, you know, the trans kids that see themselves in it. It's about the people that didn't realize that they were trans and then read the book and were like, oh, this sounds kind of like me. It's for them. It's not about me at all anymore. Yeah.
I'm interested in the process of writing trauma because I think that there is a rising trend in the expectation of trauma as performance. So you look at something like Hannah Gadsby's Nanette, which is 90% trauma, and its success has meant that it's gone on again, and this is the final show, and then gone on again, and this is the final show. And I think that for me, coming from a spoken word background, it's so integral to that culture of trauma as eliciting emotions, and trauma, that expectation is 100% there in spoken word to relive your trauma on stage for an audience. And so I think that ties interestingly into authenticity, but what I'm interested in from you, or to hear your thoughts about, is like, what does that do for like speaking up here? How does that make you feel? How do you relate to your audience if there is that elephant in the room?
I think it's so hard. It's so hard when your like personal and political are so intertwined, and when your work is your life and your life is your work. Because I don't get to tap out. I don't have business hours. I've been at clubs where people have tried to talk to me about my book, or like panels that I've been on, or, you know, male privilege or feminism, and I'm like, I want to engage in this, and I'm so glad that you're having these conversations, but I'm at the club, babe. Like, I just want to dance. Like, I'm just here to dance.
Is this really the right time?
Yeah, like, I can't hear you at all. And it's hard, and then I feel like such a like diva for not wanting to engage in that conversation, but it's like so emotionally draining, and maybe this is the one time that I get to just recharge. So I tend to like not go out as much anymore and just recharge at home, because that way no one's demanding things from me, and then I don't feel bad about not being able to give it. Yeah, I don't know, I think it's really hard. People want you to be vulnerable all the time, and I am vulnerable all the time. And sometimes I just want to disguise myself a little bit and, yeah, not be like that.
Because one thing I find quite interesting is like people feel very entitled to your attention and your energy, especially I feel like if you put yourself out there and you do take up this space as like a representative, people from your own community feel very comfortable pulling you up on stuff much more brutally, I think, than maybe in other scenarios. I'm not sure. But it's like you balance that accountability with that generosity, and people really are, as Britney Spears might say, they want a piece of you.
Good reference. I've actually been listening to Britney all day. So.
Good. Topical. We didn't plan that one.
We didn't need to.
But I'm interested to hear how you navigate being in a public space, and like literally, like this book is you.
I navigate it to my detriment, really. Like, I will always have the time and the energy for people and their questions and their stories, whether I actually have the time and energy for it or not. Like, I'm nowhere near being willing to be like, hey, I actually like can't have this conversation right now. I'm just not gonna do it. It's just not me. There is so much that people don't see. There is so much of the unseen when people come up and say, oh, I saw that interview. Like, they don't see the 5 people that came up before them. They don't see the 4 messages on Instagram or the ones on Facebook that I responded to that very same day that were like, I'm dealing with this, or I'm having suicidal thoughts, or I'm doing this. And that's not even my friends, that's just like strangers. And then all the people that I'm on suicide watch for, because the queer community has so many people constantly on the very cusp of terrible mental health. Like, I've been on suicide watch for so many people. Again, I'm 21. Like, that should not happen. And this poster survey has been apocalyptic for our community. So yeah, and I don't want to show anyone that I'm that exhausted when they come up and they're like, oh my God, I saw you on this thing. I just want to be like, oh, that's so cool. And I am excited and I am grateful and I do want to engage. But I think what I need is that I need people to give me a slice of their vulnerability. So whenever someone's like, oh, I've read your book, I'm like, cool, tell me 5 facts about yourself. Because I like really need us to be a little bit more equalized. I need a little bit more vulnerability from you. Like, I've given you my whole life story, and if you want to talk about this with me, that's great. But like, I need something from you, because otherwise I'm just gonna feel so raw and exposed out here, and you may as well be a brick wall. Like, I need to know something about your soul, and you need to crack it open just a bit for me. When I get that, it's different, because it's a reciprocal energy. It's like we're both kind of draining our energies and giving it to each other, and that works really beautifully. Like, you know, I've had young trans people sharing their hearts and souls with me, and we get to like connect in this beautiful way, and then I don't leave feeling like, oh, I leave kind of holding my head up high and thinking, okay, there's hope and I feel good about this. And yeah.
Yeah, I always feel like when someone approaches you, they've engaged with, especially if it's a memoir, but they've engaged with some really deep stuff, and so they feel like they know you, but you don't know them from anyone, and so they could be anyone to you. They could be an MRA, you know, they could be any of the...
yeah, I mean, they could be like a white supremacist. Like, I literally don't know. And sometimes people say hi to me, and they don't say who they are. And then they realize that they've seen an interview of me or something. And I'm like, so you realize that screens aren't reciprocal, right? Like, I didn't...
I can't
didn't
see you.
Like, I didn't have... When you watch my YouTube video, like, it wasn't a reciprocal conversation. And I just really need people to introduce themselves to me, because I don't want to be that person who's like, oh, I don't know who you are. It's like, I want to know who everyone is. That's my problem, is that I want to know more about everyone all the time. Like, I want them to tell me things about themselves, and then it'll be great.
So we both know how strange it is or it can be, being non-binary, being assigned female at birth. Oh, I've already asked that question.
Never mind.
Sorry, dipping in and out. The last question that I have is one that we've talked about. Going forward, and leaning off what we just said, what do you want from your readers? What do you expect from them? Where do you want them to go after reading your book?
Firstly, I want them to remove me from the narrative. I want my book to be a vehicle to get to so much more. And I think some people get kind of caught up on, like I've had people messaging me, like, yo, you're such an inspiration, you're so brave, you're so this, and I appreciate it, and it's lovely. But like, again, this isn't about me. Like, this is a critical global emergency, what we're talking about with trans people. Like, this isn't about me. This has nothing to do with me even. Like, it is so much bigger than that. And if you were a straight person and you thought it was a really good idea to make conversation with gay people about the postal survey during the postal survey, then you're not doing it properly. You're not doing allyship properly. You don't understand what we actually need from you, and you need to do more work. So I expect people to make a promise to themselves that they're going to work harder in these areas, that they're not just going to come to one panel or read one book about it. But I mean, that book scratches the very surface of gender theory and queer theory and the experiences of queer people. It is the 101s. And there is so much further to go, and I want people to want to go there, because it's not just about activism and you should feel guilty and you should feel responsible. It's also unbelievable. Like, the history of our queer community and what our elders have paved the road for us to do is so mind-boggling and so exciting. I mean, as wanky as it sounds, when I first read like Judith Butler's theories, I was like, oof, this is so cool. I want people to feel excited about that, and to feel excited about this activism, and to want to show up and to want to be critiqued, I think, is a big one. When a trans person says to you, actually, what you just said was a bit problematic, I want them to be like, oh my God, thank you so much for telling me. That's great. I'm going to learn more now, rather than being like, you don't know that. Actually, I have a best friend who's a trans person and they said it was fine that I did that. So you're wrong about transphobia, you trans person. I want people to want to learn so much about this that they're so excited that they got it wrong so that they can learn more. That's how I feel about activism. I think sometimes people expect queer people or people in politically left areas to not be constantly criticizing our own ideologies and being pulled up on things all the time. But I have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to a lot of different intersections. I am so excited to be pulled up on what I don't know, because it means that I get to learn so much more. And I don't know heaps. Again, 21. I hope that I make mistakes. I hope I'm getting things wrong. That's a good thing. So I want people to be excited about learning, and excited about opening their minds, and excited about the queer revolution that is happening right now. It's not even coming anymore. It's happening right now. And to not get defensive about it, and not get aggressive about it, and not hold all of these societal things really close in. I want everyone in this room, and everyone who read the book, and everyone who's on this journey to be on a trajectory of this kind of activism.
I always think that trans people are really interesting, because when it comes to sexuality, straight people especially can be like, oh, but gay people, they're just over there in a box, they're just different from me. But trans people really blur that and impact on cis people's identity, because there's that blurring of line between sexuality and gender. If a straight man is attracted to a trans woman, then he has to confront himself, and a whole bunch of feelings get accompanied with that.
Even less than that, I had boys in high school being like, but if you're a boy, what does that make me? It's babe, you've got way bigger problems. That is very fragile.
Yes, exactly that. But yeah. I get excited for the idea that people can read a book like yours and be like, oh, well, yeah, what does this mean for me? And get excited about that. Yeah. I think that's really beautiful.
And I think we're superheroes. I really think queer people are bloody superheroes. I think, firstly, everything we touch turns to queer. I don't think that you can kiss a queer person and not become queer yourself.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Well, certainly
So-
non-binary people.
Yeah, I mean, anyone that's ever checked me out is gay as far as I'm concerned. I don't care what your gender is, that's just how it works. I think there's that, and I think that we just like enable people to be their authentic selves. Like, I really believe, I really, really believe that gender expectations and stereotypes oppress everyone. I don't think that anyone is liberated by them. I've never heard a blokey dude who was like, you know, that one time I got told to man up, that made me feel real good, and now I like really get it and I know who I am. Like, no one feels good by that. No one, like every woman in this room, I'm sure at some point has been told she's behaving unladylike, or that that's not an outfit that you can wear, or that's unflattering, or, you know, or you must be on your period, or you're being very emotional, like all of those kind of things. Like, I just don't believe any of those expectations are liberating and exciting and empowering for anyone. And I think that we shave parts of ourselves to fit into those boxes. And so then when we see people that exist outside of them, we feel angry because we're like, but I've been working so hard to maintain these standards that people told me I had to. Why do you get to frolic in the woods like that and just do whatever the hell you want? That's not fair. That makes me angry. And
I want to frolic. I want to frolic.
Yeah, I want to wear flowers. I want to wear a dress and have a beard. Wait, what? You know, like, that's what that anger is. It's not like, oh, I hate you. It's like, but I'm working so hard to maintain these standards that are hard for me, you know? And so I think, like, as queer people, we're kind of superheroes because we get to, like, open that little cage that people have put themselves in and be like, come on, come frolic.
Flowers
Like,
over here. Flowers on our
yeah,
shirts.
we've got flowers. You know, like, you can actually do whatever you want, and, like, you don't have to anymore. You just don't have to.
So now is the time for questions. I'd like to encourage any trans people, if there are any, to put their hands up if they've got burning questions, or people of colour or women. I know if you're anything like me that you've been sitting on a question and you're very anxious about it and you want to put your hand up, but you want someone else to go first. But yes, so please be brave. Let's hear from you.
This always happens when I'm like at schools. I'm like, all right, so any questions? And then they just like look at me in horror. And then I eventually get one question and I'm like, oh God, I hope it's not really full on. And then it's like, where'd you get your jacket? I'm like, yeah, good question. Good one. So, you know, that could be the first question
you want
if it makes people feel better.
In your book, you talk about your religion, like you're Jewish and stuff. So how has your religion shaped your view of gender and sexuality?
That's such a good question. Yeah, we wanted to tackle that one, but then we're like, oh, I don't know if we'll have time. So I'm glad that you brought it up. It's such a good question. For me, Judaism is not a religion. For me, Judaism is a culture, first and foremost, and within that, there is religion, language, art, music, peoplehood, nationhood. There are so many different things that contribute to what it means to be Jewish. I don't believe I could be Jewish on my own. Like, I really need community to make that happen. So as far as like faith goes and the religious side of things, I've never been completely connected to that. I haven't grown up in a religious household or around religious people very much. But for me, my community and my ideas of like collective responsibility and I guess existing as a smaller part of a bigger unit is very much intertwined in my Judaism. I think my relationship with my family is very related to Judaism. You know, like I'm so close to them and they're so important to me, and I'm such a mama's boy, which is, I guess, a very Jewish archetype. And I'm perfectly fine with that. And, you know, I think it's really interesting, especially around this time of year where Christmas rolls around and everyone assumes that you're Christian, and it's this like total hegemony, and then people in the queer community are all having a really rough time because they're about to see their family for the first time and who knows how long and whatever. Everyone's just expecting you to have this experience, and I don't do Christmas. That's not a thing I've ever done. I actually grew up thinking Santa was anti-Semitic because people used to say to me, so there's this man that brings people presents, but not if you're Jewish. And I was like,
rude.
Why are we celebrating him? That is messed up. it's so unfair. You know, so that's just not my experience. I mean, my family aren't surprised every time they see me because I like look completely different because I see them every week. It's just like part of our experience. So yeah, I would say it's very central to who I am and my activism.
One thing I remember we spoke about is when you went to Israel, so in Hebrew, verbs are gendered.
Yeah, everything is gendered. Everything.
But that I thought it was interesting because you talked about dysphoria, because obviously it would trigger dysphoria, but it was easier to correct it because you would say, I man walk to the fridge and man open the fridge.
I do man walk to fridge.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
We're not reinforcing binaries here on the stage. That's not what we do.
Yeah, it was, oh God, living in Israel was that's a whole nother session that we could do. But yeah, living in a gendered world with gendered language was really hectic. And again, also quite empowering because being able to correct people and yeah, man walking everywhere. That was my goal of the evening. Yes.
Thank you.
Anyway, yeah, so that was really interesting. Israelis are also a lot more abrupt and would just be like, what are you? I don't, like, what is this? Whereas Aussies would kind of pretend to be more polite about it in a way that I really didn't like. I was almost kind of like, yeah, cool, let's just like lay it all out, you know? They'd be like, boy or girl? I'm like, all right, yeah, cool.
Yeah, sure.
Like they
both-
kind
yeah,
of
both
spoke
need
to me
it.
like kids do, which I kind of like because I get kids and I can explain things to them. I can't handle people like whispering about me behind my back or pointing and staring, or I don't deal with like passive aggression as well as I deal with aggression. I can handle that. So yeah, it was really interesting, but I remember the most gender affirming moment of my life was standing out the front of the male side of the Western Wall where like only men are allowed to be, and I went there and I was terrified and no one looked twice at me, and then this rabbi shook my hand right out the front, and like in the Jewish tradition, like men can't shake hands with women, so it was a really affirming moment, but also I was so guilt-ridden because I felt like I'd forced him to sin or something, and I was like, oh my God, if he knew what would happen, you know, it was terrifying, but it was the most affirming moment. Yeah.
With the AFL and the women's AFL and this man who transferred to a woman who wants to be in the women's AFL, what sort of space
Sorry,
do you...
let me just stop you there just for a second. She's a woman. She's not not transferred to a. She's not a man who's transferred to a woman.
Right.
That's a premise that's very important to make first and foremost. But yes, continue.
And do you think the AFL should create another space for people who just want to be different?
Well, I'd quite like a non-binary league.
Yeah, I just hate sport and I don't care about football. And it's just not, I'm sorry, it's just not a question I can answer because I just don't care about AFL at all. I just don't, I'm sorry, maybe that's really anti-Australian or something, but I'm okay with it.
I mean, I guess the answer is in the premise really is she's a woman, so she should be allowed to play on the women's league. I mean, it's just as simple as that. It's not hard.
Exactly.
If you're struggling with that, then you're struggling with other things. You're struggling with the idea of transness, basically. And I think in order to answer that question, then you first need to like unpack the trans stuff, and then you know the other stuff will make sense.
Totally.
Anyone else?
Do you find that people have a certain fear when they chat to you because they don't want to be politically incorrect and they don't want to say something that is offensive and yet they are truly interested?
I get one of two. I get one person who is very afraid of being politically incorrect, or I get the complete opposite, who has no fear and just goes for gold. I do get a lot of people that are very afraid. If I feel safe with them and I have the energy, I'll say to them, like, it's okay if you use the wrong language, you know, like, the thing about trans people is that we are like, we have so much patience like more than any other kind of person, I think. Like people of marginalized communities have so much patience, and everyone thinks we don't because they might see like one response that we've had this one time, but that is usually like 1 in 100. Like we're usually very, very patient. So yeah, I get people that like really want to learn, and I can see it, you know, I can see when people ask me a question if they are genuinely invested in what the answer is. And if they are, I don't care how they ask the question. I don't care if they used all the wrong language. I don't care if they called me a woman. I really don't. Like, I really don't care, because everyone has completely different access to information and to resources, and I'm not going to be classist about that or ableist about that. I just want to listen to them and be like, yeah, cool, I hear what you're saying. This is my response. I get other people who might ask with perfect language, but who are just jerks, and they don't care about the answer, and they're just trying to get me to justify my whole existence, and I have no time or space for them. So it's about your demeanor. It's about who you are. It's about whether I can see inside that there's a good person there. That's what I care about. I don't really care about the language that you use, because that can change. I mean, this is something I always say, is that you can become more politically correct, but you can't become less of an asshole. Like, if you're an asshole, you're an asshole, you know? Like, yeah, there are some people who have very good politics, but are bad people.
Yeah, I second that.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question that's more related to your choice to be so publicly out. You mentioned that you still kind of struggle a little bit with I guess looking after your own health and well-being now, but what were the kind of checks and balances that you went through when you were choosing to then write a book about this?
That's a really good question. I actually have had that question asked to me in a very different way, which again, it relates to the previous question. I had one person being like, so why are you telling us all of this? And I was like, well, you came. Like, you didn't have to come. I was like, sorry. Yeah, I chose to be public because I have a lot of privilege, and I'm not completely exhausted yet. I have privilege in the fact that I'm young. I have privilege in the fact that I'm mask presenting, that I'm gender conforming, like that people read me as a cis man. And that means that a lot of people listen to me, which I really hate. And I hate that that's the way that it is, but that is the way that it is. I'll walk into a workplace and the men in business suits will listen to me more because I'm a man. And because my jokes are funnier now, even though they're the exact same jokes. People give me more space, so I've chosen to take that and put myself on the front line because I can handle it. Because there are some people that can't handle it. And that's not because they're not strong, it's because they get a lot more of the brunt of this stuff that I don't get. I don't deal with such overt transphobia on the street unless I'm like wearing a dress or something. Like if I'm dressed like this, you know, people will like look at me, but I don't deal with so much. I deal with a lot more of the like internal and like covert stuff. But yeah, I think that's a big reason why, because if I do it, then other people won't have to. That's how emotional labor works, is that if you put yourself at the front and you kind of like filter out some of that stuff, it means that younger people won't have to do it. I did so much educating of people when I was 17 and I had no idea what the hell I was talking about. Because the thing is just being trans doesn't mean you know everything about gender theory and queer politics. You actually have to learn and study that stuff. So I feel like I went and did the studying and like tried to learn as much as I could, and obviously there's so much more to learn, but now I can kind of go into schools and do these talks, and then the kids don't have to do them. And I've had kids be like, you know, after you came, I came out as bisexual, and that was really exciting, and I was able to do that because you'd like come in first, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. And again, yeah, like as I'm saying, like it's not about me. Like, yes, I'm still working on self-care and I'm still working on whatever, but there's a much bigger picture here. There is a much bigger project going on here that is a queer revolution, and we need people on the front line, and we need community care, and we need people that are willing to do that. And like, I know who my partners are in that, and I'm willing to be there on that front. And there are definitely privileges that allow me to do that as well. Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Sorry, me. Thank you. Sorry, I'm really nervous. I'm really shaking.
It's okay, me too.
It's a sort of a two-parter. The first bit is, like, I walked in today and it's funny that you bring up the clothing thing because I felt like I'm not in uniform. Like, I feel like an absolute imposter. And so
Awesome.
I guess it's probably what's making me shake so much. My first question is, how do you deal with that sense of imposter syndrome? And also, how do you deal with going into circumstances, you know, where you're asked to be like the token queer or the token non-binary and dealing with people who don't speak the language of the politics? How do you navigate those areas, and do you choose to navigate those areas, and do you think we have a responsibility to navigate those areas?
Great questions. I'm so glad that you asked them. Imposter syndrome. Fury? It's something we talk about all the time.
All the time. I deal with imposter syndrome by embracing it and saying, haha, you asked me to be here and I'm not as good as you think I am, but I've pulled one over you, so yes, I'm an imposter, but that's your bad, not mine.
It's like being a really good spy or something.
It's and that works most of the time. Some of the time it doesn't. But that, and creating communities of other people who feel like they shouldn't be here. Because if you're all saying that, then it sort of, you feel less alone, and you're like, it helps quieten those feelings. Like, oh, this is a thing.
Yeah, I always feel like in order to be a writer, you have to think that you're not a writer. Like, that's like one of the credentials. It's like everyone is constantly questioning themselves. And I kind of think it means you care. Like, Sally Goldner actually said to me once, I forget who she was quoting because she was quoting someone else, but she was saying that, you know, she was told that the moment that she doesn't feel really nervous about speaking, she doesn't care enough. And I thought that was really beautiful, is that, like, I feel like an imposter because I care so much and I want to do the best job that I can. And then I think the thing that comforts me again is that there are lots of white mediocre men that do really shit jobs and don't care and don't think about it. And so if they exist, then I can also exist and take up space.
Set the
even if I
benchmark
don't
really
think.
low.
Yeah,
That's
I saw like a tote bag that once said, like, carry yourself with the confidence of a mediocre white man. So that's something I like try to do sometimes.
And with regards to the second part, which was about, my memory is not great. It was about being the token. I do it with grace, and I try to be open and kind to people. If it's grossly tokenistic, I'll be a professional, do my job, and get out, and just not do it again, and let people know that they're not the best. But basically, I try and do the work so that the people behind me don't have to do that work.
Exactly,
so the next people who engage with that organisation don't have to be the token.
Yeah, I think you can, like, pull your hands up and be like, whoa, that's a lot of labour, I'm not going to do that, and get really angry about things. But at the end of the day, like, if you don't do it, someone else will have to. So I think when I feel respected by an organisation and they pay me to be there and they're like, here, we're going to give you money for the service that you're providing, I'm more than happy to be a token. Like, okay, that's fine. Because you actually respect me. You're not just seeing me as, you know, like, so many people come in and like, oh, can you give this speech about this? And I'm like, cool, how much will you pay me? And they were like, oh, we're not going to pay. But it'll be really good for them, or like, it'll be good for the greater good or whatever. I'm like, cool, the greater good doesn't pay my rent. Like, I need money to survive. But yeah, I think things are getting better. I mean, I've been on panels with diverse panelists that weren't on diversity, and that was really exciting. Like, you know, you've got writers' festivals where it's like white panels, white people, all straight, all cisgender, and then the one diversity panel, and you've like ticked all the boxes, and then we've got that covered. And then there are other panels where it's like there are other writers' festivals where the main panels are like totally diverse, and so you just know who the right organisations are and who the other ones, you know. So yeah, similar to Fury, like, I think I've got some patience for some of those organisations getting it wrong. But it's also like, I'll talk to them about it and be like, hey, this was kind of tokenistic. I'm really glad that you booked me for this gig, but like, next time these are the things I would do right. If they do it right next time, great. If they don't, that's when I'm kind of like, okay, I'm going to put you guys on the back burner a bit because I've just given you the opportunity to be better and you haven't.
Well, Nev, you're going to be really proud of me because that's been flashing for so long, but I thought I would just give us that space. So I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Hares and Hyenas at the back for selling Nev's book and that you can buy if you'd like it. I want to thank the Wheeler Centre and Nev.
Thank you, everyone.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.